Good morning. Good morning. Could you all take your seats, please? We'll get started. Thank you. My name is John Young. I serve as the Executive Director of the Legal Aid Society. For those who are not from Louisville, welcome to Louisville. I'm doing the introduction before the introduction, and to introduce a video of a client story of which we are particularly proud. This is, I don't want to upstage the video, but this is a story of dignity, great story of giving dignity to a client, and then the dignity that one can get from receiving civil legal aid services.
My name is Wesley Doak, and this is what equal justice looks like. So for me, growing up, I was big into sports, school, baseball, went to college, played college baseball, and I had a sports injury where a doctor prescribed pain pills. That addiction or that pain pill usage continued to grow. And it led me down paths and avenues that I never could have imagined. I didn't honestly see a way out at the time. When I went to see the judge, it was an agreement. He ended up giving me 5 years probation, 5 on the shelf, and I had to do long-term treatment, a treatment program. So that's what I did. I went to Isaiah House, and I did a long-term program there. I was there for 11 months, and when I completed the program, I started working there. There was a guy there, he was on the medical staff, he was also in recovery, and he put his 2 weeks in. He said, I'm going to apply for the fire department. So I think I was like, that would be, that would be an awesome career to fall into. So yeah, that's when I started digging in, and I found the program.
My name is Brian Fields. I'm the senior attorney of West Louisville and our HIV/AIDS project. I met Mr. Doak in 2022 at the expungement clinic in Washington County at a rehab called Isaiah House. And Mr. Doak needed an expungement after he had been dealing with substance use disorder, was in recovery, but there was an urgency to it because he wanted to be a firefighter. He wanted to have a good life for his daughter, a good life for his family, and a good life for himself, and serve his community. And so to be able to do that for somebody who's so committed to others, that just was really impactful. And I was really grateful that our paths crossed.
Brian didn't know me. He didn't know me. I came in, expungements, he looked at me as a normal human being, didn't know my past, didn't know my history. I kind of gave a brief moment, and he believed in me, and I won't ever be able to repay what he's done. I'm thankful and I'm grateful, and I don't take that lightly, and I think about it all the time.
Well, good morning, everyone. Is this on? Yes. Okay. I'm John Levy, as you can see from the screen. It's my privilege to continue to serve as the 10th chair of the Legal Services Corporation. And on behalf of our board, welcome you to this special forum on increasing access to justice. Just have to say, sitting here in the first row is the 9th chair of the Legal Services Corporation, Frank Strickland. Frank, thanks for being And we at LSC, how lucky we are to have a long-serving, really outstanding, dedicated, bipartisan board. And here in Kentucky, I particularly want to recognize one of our board members who began his service with me in 2010, Vic Maddox. There you go. Until very recently, he was counsel for special litigation in the Kentucky Attorney General's office. We're so grateful to you, Vic, for your tremendous expertise, your dedication, and for those of you joining us at this evening's reception. And if you weren't planning to, you should change your plans, because you're going to have the special treat of hearing Vic's terrific musical talents. I would also like to thank LSC's Kentucky grantees, Appalachian Research and Defense Fund, Kentucky Legal Aid of Bluegrass, and the Legal Aid Society. We heard your presentations yesterday. Your work is vital. Your impact, as we just saw, life-changing for families, seniors, veterans, and survivors. It's a pleasure to be back here after nearly 16 years to meet with you in person in your home state and to learn from some of you, your clients, about the tremendous services you are providing. And if you'll allow me, one final thanks to the folks from Paws with a Purpose for bringing out some beautiful furry friends to greet us here today. We've actually never had dogs at one of these forums, but what a great addition. Our program today makes it evident that people who call Kentucky home are passionate about contributing to their state and creating opportunities for those who live here. We will be hearing today from leaders from statewide initiatives, local businesses, services organizations, as they share remarks and participate in two insightful panel discussions. One of our speakers, a staff attorney from Legal Aid of the Bluegrass, is an alumna of LSC's Rural Summer Legal Corps Fellowship Program. This is a program that our board started, and this year marks its 10th anniversary. LSC has raised private funds during this past decade to mobilize more than 400 law students over that period to expand capacity at rural legal services organizations. And over this decade, these rural fellows have served over 14,000 people in rural communities. And this summer, 2 such student fellows are here with Appalachian Research and Defense Fund. Beyond adding capacity, LSC's vision for this program is to expose the next generation of lawyers to the important work of legal services in helping to meet the needs of rural Americans. As our focus today is on recovery, workforce and development and economic opportunity, I'm also moved to reflect on LSC's opioid task force, which brought together experts from across the country in 2018 and 19 to envision a collaborative path forward to addressing this public health crisis and its rippling effects. The seeds for this initiative, in fact, were planted in significant part by Vic Maddox and by leaders at LSC's Kentucky grantees who sounded the alarm that there was work to be done to address the devastating impacts of this emerging crisis, the opioid crisis, and that legal services needed to be a core part of that work. Well, the Bluegrass State has been a real leader in developing and implementing comprehensive approaches to recovery, one that brings together healthcare, the courts, law enforcement, human services, the private sector, and more. Well, another crisis which we are deeply familiar with, frankly, all too familiar, is the justice gap. When low-income Americans do not receive any or enough legal help for 92% of their civil legal problems, it is absolutely a crisis. Unfortunately, as we are here at the 250th anniversary of the founding of our country, we also hear that even average Americans have difficulty accessing the justice in the civil justice system for their families. I believe the work of civil legal services is deeply patriotic, and LSC remains dedicated to helping our country live up to its foundational promise of equal justice. And it recalls for me the words spoken by our nation's late great Supreme Court Justice Antonin Scalia, who at the Legal Services Corporation's 40th anniversary in 2014 powerfully declared, "The American ideal is not for some justice." I'm quoting the justice, I should make clear. "It is, as the Pledge of Allegiance says, liberty and justice for all." Or as the Supreme Court pediment has it, equal justice. Justice Scalia went on, "I've always thought that's somewhat redundant. Can there be justice if it is not equal? Can there be a just society when some do not have justice? Equality, equal treatment is perhaps the most fundamental element of justice." Well, we know there is much work that remains to be done to advance our nation's promise of equal access to justice. And we're so fortunate to be here with so many of you who have dedicated your professional lives to accomplishing that goal. Your work helping to move the needle so that more folks have access to justice is the best anniversary present anyone could ever give our country. Thank you for your tireless commitment. I look forward to learning today during today's compelling program, and it's now my great privilege to introduce my friend from Kentucky and fellow board member, Vic Maddox.
Good morning, folks, and thank you all for coming. If you've taken the time out of your day to be here, you know how important this topic is and the issues that this forum will address, so I won't belabor that. Before I get into the reason I'm here, which is to introduce our next guest, Chris Evans, I want to take a moment to thank John for what he's done over the last 15 years as chairman of the LSC board corporation. Frank Strickland and his board laid a great foundation, but when we came along in 2010, I think it's fair to say that there was some improvements that were possible. One of the things I told the ABA when I was being interviewed for the job after my nomination was that I wanted to see that legal services Corporation and the work it does for its grantees was done in a fair and efficient manner. And I think we've done great strides in making that happen. We created a fiscal task force that sort of oversaw our accounting practices and the way our grants were awarded, the way our grants were supervised, and the way our staff interacted with our grantees. I know that sometimes grantees have a love-hate relationship with the LSC board, but I like to think that we've made life by and large better for the 130 organizations that we help fulfill their own missions. And John Levy, nobody was more of a warrior in that regard and more tireless in his efforts, and continues to be today. So thank you, John, for all of your leadership. I'm going to introduce Chris Evans, who is a tireless public servant here in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. Before I do that, I want to lay a little groundwork for the whole topic of the opioid crisis in Kentucky, our efforts to combat it and ultimately to abate it and help all of the people who have been affected by it. It's no exaggeration to say that opioid addiction and the consequences of that for the individuals involved and their families and their communities has been one of the most devastating illnesses to come along in decades. And if you're a legal aid lawyer or grantee employee, you know that it affects nearly every aspect of the lives and the families of those people involved, because they lose their jobs, they lose their homes, sometimes they lose their children, they are incarcerated, they are homeless, and the whole panoply of issues that the opioid crisis raises are the issues that legal aid grantees address. In 2019, John's already mentioned our opioid task force, which I was co-chair of. In 2019, when Daniel Cameron was elected Attorney General, he asked me to come into the office and head up the civil side of his office. And I was a partner practicing law here in Louisville. And I thought, I've never really had much interest in state government. But it was an interesting proposition, and Daniel Cameron was a compelling individual. And so I said yes. I didn't quite realize at the time that the opioid crisis was front and center in the responsibilities of that job. I was sworn in at 10 o'clock on December 17th, 2019 as the Assistant Deputy Attorney General. And at 10:30 that morning, I sat down with Attorney General Cameron, our Deputy Attorney General Barry Dunn, and the outside counsel who had been hired by Attorney General Andy Beshear to represent the Commonwealth in pursuing the lawsuits against the opioid manufacturers, the opioid distributors, ultimately the pharmacies, and all the other players involved in making the crisis what it was. There was a lot of pressure on General Cameron to fire those lawyers because, frankly, they'd been hired by Andy Beshear. And there were a lot of people on the Republican side of the legal world who thought, A, plaintiffs' lawyers should never be hired by the Attorney General's office, and B, the lawsuits were somehow a sham. We spent 3 or 4 months actually working with and interviewing and doing due diligence with those counsel, and ultimately decided to keep them, and to keep them with even more support than they previously had. I spent the better part, probably the majority of my time for the first year, 2020, when I wasn't fighting Governor Beshear on his excessive use of emergency powers, I was supporting Governor Beshear's efforts to bring about the end of the opioid crisis. And ultimately, we brought in over $900 million in settlements. Attorney General Russell Coleman has added another at least $100 million in settlement money to that fund. And we created, with the legislature, the Opioid Abatement Commission that Chris Evans is the head of today. And that commission gave half of the money to the counties and cities to do with as they wished based on their own priorities, and half of the money to the commission to administer to make grants to the various organizations that were deserving. And I think it's true from the very beginning of our awards that each of our grantees has received at least one award annually from the Opioid Abatement Commission money. And I'm actually pretty proud of that because it was something that I thought was important. So that's, sort of the background. I met Chris Evans, I think in 2022, 23. We were at an opioid abatement town hall hearing in Corbin. And Chris, who had been the director, the special agent in charge of the Drug Enforcement Agency here in Louisville at the time, and I think he'd spent 28 years with the DEA, was at that town hall. And I was pleased to meet Chris then and to stay in touch with him over the next couple of years. And when Attorney General Coleman was elected, General Coleman had the good sense to hire Chris to be the director of the Opioid Abatement Commission created by the state legislature. Chris is, like I said, been an amazing public servant. He continues to be an amazing public servant in administering the program, the hundreds of millions of dollars that are so important to abating this crisis. And I'm so pleased and privileged to be able to introduce to you all today Director Chris Evans.
Good morning. Thank you. I was worried I was going to have to drag that out of you a little bit, so this early in the morning. First of all, thank you to LSC for the opportunity to be here with you today. And most importantly, thank you to all of you for the work that you do. On behalf of the commission and its staff, we recognize the importance of what you do, the critical role you play in our communities in helping to create and maintain vibrant and healthy communities. And so I want to make sure you know that we all appreciate your work and want to thank you on behalf of that. I'm just going to cover three brief things to be clear, but as it relates to the commission and the work we do, we are an opportunity to support organizations across the Commonwealth. And one of the key aspects of what we look at and try to consider and try to make sure we support is the ability to sustain efforts to help organizations and efforts that benefit communities take root. One of the things that's critically important is that we don't want to waste those critical funds which come from such an area of pain and things that aren't going to take hold. And we've looked at the legal aid and understand the role that it takes in terms of supporting individuals, supporting communities, and making sure that things can take root in communities and can grab hold and continue to deliver services to people who are in need. The second thing that I want to make sure it's clear is there is a clear role and a clear understanding on the importance of second chance opportunities and removing barriers for people in the Commonwealth of Kentucky. The Commonwealth has made great strides in improving, but we need to continue to make sure that everybody has an opportunity to be the best version of themselves and bring to our communities their best skills and their best talents. That's what we try to support. That's what we want to make sure it happens. And as LSC continues that work and continues those things, I want to make sure that that's clear to you that that's part of what we're trying to support. second chance hiring, removing barriers is God's work. I know that's a strange thing to say. I used to live in California, and I might have phrased it a little differently, but I'm in Kentucky now, so I can phrase it that way. You've got to understand that we look at it, and I personally look at it as making sure that people have the opportunity to contribute. Having that opportunity gives people value like nothing else does. It gives them a belief in themselves, gives their families belief in them, gives them dreams, has them buy into the hope that they can help make places better, safer, stronger, and more of what they dream for it to be. That's what we want to support the commission. That's the work that we want to do. And I say that, it's one thing you could say, well, I've heard that somewhere, I've seen those sorts of things. But I want to make sure that it's also clear that everyone has a role to play in that. It does not matter what individuals' titles are. It does not matter what their positions are. I have talked to receptionists who have said, do you understand how important your role is? You are the first voice that people hear about our organization. By you directing a call to the right places, you have changed somebody's day. You have changed what they're going through. You are important. And so I want to make sure you're clear. Everybody in this fight, everybody who's involved in this, everybody who is here has real and valuable importance to the work to keeping healthy communities. When you do the work that you do, it's like, the old adage, you throw a rock into a pond and you watch the ripples go and what that looks like as it goes across. When you change one life, when you give assistance to one person, you're not just giving assistance to that one person, you're giving assistance to generations. And I speak from that not from a place of an academic response of what this looks like. I am one of those beneficiaries. Now, it's not through the legal aid services, but I grew up in a family where my grandfather was a Baptist minister who died when my father was 6 years old. My father came up in a very hard life, in very difficult ways. And along his path, as I grew older and we had conversations about what he encountered, I learned there were people who poured themselves into him along the way. And in doing so, when he had some tough choices to make and had to take on a career and actually join the military during the war as a way to feed the family, he made decisions based on those things he had learned that not only altered his life, but they altered the generations of my family. I have benefited, my brothers benefited, my nieces, my nephews. There is a ripple effect from what people poured into my grandfather, into my father, that has seen generational change in my family. So I ask you all, as you are here for this, and as you continue to move forward, please continue those things that pour into others, the great work you are doing, because you are creating generational change. Don't think about the one person who's in front of you, or the one conversation, or the one meeting. The work you do, giving people hope, giving them a chance, giving them an opportunity, pours into them, pours into our future, and helps us build safe and healthy communities. So I want to thank you all for the work you're doing. Thank you for being here. Thank LSC for the opportunity to be with you today. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Chris. Thanks for being here today. Thanks for your inspiring remarks, and thank you for doing God's work here in Kentucky. Good morning, everybody. Thank you all for being here. I'm Ron Flagg, the president of LSC, and I'm about to be joined by two distinguished speakers, and I'll introduce them in a moment. We've heard about Kentucky's commitment to recovery and opportunity. We've heard it from Chris and we've heard it from Vic. And now we're going to hear from two leaders who help turn those ideas into action every day. Across the country, employers are struggling to find workers. while many qualified people remain on the sidelines because of legal and other barriers that have little to do with their ability and their ability to succeed and to help employers across the country. We're going to hear about the Kentucky Comeback Initiative, and through that initiative, the Bluegrass State has prioritized second chance employment as a way to both address workforce needs and help people thrive in the aftermath of the opioid epidemic. The success of this program in Kentucky serves as an example for the rest of our nation of what successful workforce development can look like in the coming decade. And I'm pleased to say that as we speak to you live here in Louisville, we are broadcasting and live streaming this program across the country, and we will be putting it on our website so people across the country can return to it in future days. I'm joined today, as I say, by two experts who put all of these ideas into action. Ryan Bowman is the Director of Partnerships for the Kentucky Chamber Foundation and its Workforce Recovery Program. Barbara Aker, who leads HR as the Family Pride Director at Richmond Baking and More Than a Bakery. Ryan and Barb, thank you so much for joining me. Let's jump right in. Ryan, with you. The Kentucky Chamber made second choice employment a major initiative several years ago. Can you tell us what prompted the Chamber to make this work a priority?
Yeah, thank you, Ron, and thanks everyone for being here. Just real quick, I want to give another round of applause for Chris Evans. Chris Evans is such a big leader in the state whenever it comes to Fair Chance, and just hearing him speak, I'm inspired to do my job. My job is a passion project for me, but to hear Chris speak, I just want to give him one more round of applause. But yeah, so the Kentucky Chamber of Commerce, I work for the Kentucky Chamber Foundation, but as you think of a Chamber of Commerce, you really don't think of a recovery program, workforce recovery, as far as an initiative goes. We're the biggest business association in the state, and what we're hearing from our membership, which is businesses that are operating in Kentucky, that they're having struggles finding their workforce. And Kentucky is among the lowest workforce participation in the nation. We're historically in the bottom 10, about 54% workforce participation. And we're the lowest of any state that's around us except for West Virginia. So we say, thank God for West Virginia. It is very difficult for employers to find employees in this economic climate. So in response to that, we developed what we call the Workforce Recovery Program, where we want to get more people from the sidelines that are willing and able to work, that are qualified to work, that do have some barriers to employment, give them the opportunity by showing businesses tools and resources that they have available to them free of cost in the state to help individuals overcome those barriers, maybe change some policies around a little bit, but welcome a large and robust workforce into their workplace.
What have been some of your biggest lessons learned to date?
Yeah, one of the big things, I'm sure from legal counsel side of things, is we use acronyms and, you know, this world of terminology that we have. I come from a human services background. I'm a background in psychology, clinical psychology. I spent a lot of time working with the recovery population, justice involvement in recovery population. So I was having trouble really early on relating that to the business world. So we were using terms that are very common to us, like recovery. Well, to a business leader that's led a business or worked in HR their entire lives, they don't really know what recovery is. So whenever we approach a business and tell them that, you know, there's a recovery population or a justice-involved population out there that's willing and able to work, a lot of times people automatically jump to, are you asking me to hire someone that is actively using or abstaining for drugs and alcohol, or are you getting someone that has either been convicted or getting ready to be sentenced or freshly out of prison with no preparation whatsoever and asking me to invite them into my workplace? Well, the answer was no for us really early on. But when we use those terms with individuals that, are in the business world, sometimes that gets lost in translation. So really had to take a step back, and we created this program called the Fair Chance Academy, where we develop these kind of translations between our world, which is like the recovery and justice involved population or those terminologies, and really use that in business acumen and show them that, what we're doing is developing a workforce. It's a real workforce development strategy and not a community engagement strategy.
And so what sort of resources do you have? You have a website. What sort of resources do you provide to the business community?
Yeah, so during the workforce recovery program, we introduced them literally to the resources that they have available to them in the state. Whenever we first started, we did a statewide academy, so it was usually like directors and above that we would invite to come in and speak. And for those of us that are directors and above, sometimes we tell businesses how it should be operating and not how it's actually operating. So that's one of the lessons that we've learned too. So as we have gone into those regional areas, we invite the people that if a business leader is going to call that organization, that is the person that's going to answer the phone or the person that they'll be directed to that's actually doing the work that we invite in and tell them, how they have those resources available. We have everything available to them on the website that we have, KentuckyComeback.com, but we also have a live document for individuals that attend our classes or our academies. Because those of us in this room know that once you print it, it is out of date. So we want to keep it live and updated, as quickly as we can. So individuals that attend our regional events, those are live documents that stay updated.
Thank you, Ryan. Barb, Richmond Baking Company has created intentionally opportunities for people to rebuild their lives. What led you and your company to embrace second chance employment?
Well, it started off as a personal story. My nephew, we lost him to an opioid addiction at the age of 28. He had gotten tangled up in the justice system, didn't have a lot of opportunity, and it didn't turn out the way we had hoped. That kind of led me to wanting to do something more, which leads me to Ryan. So they announced the first Fair Chance Academy with the state. I went to our owner and I pled my case. He knew my story. And he said, go for it. So I attended the first Fair Chance Academy, which was amazing. I opened my eyes to a lot of things, but it didn't come away with a lot of tools necessarily at the time because we were the first one. So we had to really go back and kind of evaluate everything. When I first approached our management team about doing this, it was met with some fear, I have to tell you. But we were able to work through it and start a stream of hiring that has really helped us with retention. We had a lot of turnover in our organization, and it went from a project of the heart to a business strategy. So it was really critical to us to get that going at the bakery.
So there really are two strands here. One is the desire to give back, the desire to help people get back on their feet, and there's this kind of business aspect. What's a bottom line, if you will, a business case for it. Could you talk a little bit about that?
Sure. So this makes up about 10% of our workforce currently. But what's happened is we've hired so many second chance, or as our owner likes to say, first chance family members, that it started a referral program within them. So it's a constant stream. And plus we trust these gentlemen and ladies that are doing these referrals because they know these people inside and out. So that in and of itself, just having that referral stream is amazing. But also with the retention, we also have leaders growing within our organization. So of that 10%, almost all have been promoted once, if not twice, within our bakery walls. So it really has helped us grow.
And just to underscore this point, you talked about 10% of your colleagues being part of this program, and what was the percentage before you proactively and intentionally started this?
So 0.
So that's a big
Yeah.
difference.
Exactly.
Ryan, expanding workforce participation, like any other difficult endeavor, requires collaboration across many sectors. What partnerships have been most important to Kentucky's success?
I mean, just you really have to double underline partnerships. This isn't possible without the partnerships that we've created. It sounds almost cliche to say now that it takes a village, but it really does take a village of people willing to support individuals in order to make them successful. And it is not our view of what success is. It's success on the individual's level. But our partnerships have been just the most valuable that they could possibly be in creating a program where businesses take part in. First and foremost has to be the business community, because it has to fall within, I call it their business ethos, because we can't create a program and say, here's the framework, do this at your organization and you're going to find success. That is, we call it this one more thing initiative. If we add one more thing to a business leader's plate, they are not going to do it. We have to be the ones that take things off of their plate. Just like partnering with recovery facilities that have a real workforce development component to their recovery program, so we can have a steady pipeline of employees exiting those facilities. So instead of an employer picking up the phone to call a temporary service, or the Kentucky Career Center is another great partner of us. But instead of calling those to post those jobs, that they're calling the recovery facility or the justice facility and saying, hey, that last person that you sent me worked out great. He or she has been promoted. We want another one. And so developing those pipelines of employees are huge, and those relationships to those businesses, so we get a clear understanding of what they need as far as an employee goes, and also on the talent side, the recovery facilities, the justice facilities, and the state have been great partners.
So here in Kentucky and across the country, record clearing and expungement are a major component of legal aid program services. Can you talk about the partnerships you've had with legal aid here in Kentucky?
Yes. So Goodwill and Legal Aid of the Bluegrass are fantastic partners for us. We always work to do expungement clinics. And just a little plug for ourselves here. We've created this new program in partnership with Legal Aid of the Bluegrass and Goodwill that we call Fair Chance Opportunity Fairs. For everyone in the room that has participated in a expungement clinic, it is exactly as it sounds. It is very clinical. You're asking people that are uncomfortable with their backgrounds to come in and expose themselves and show others what maybe they feel shame for. And the Fair Chance Opportunity Fair was developed in this way that we wanted it to be inviting. I had this premise. My fiance works in the medical field, and she was like, let's just throw a parking lot party where we have music, we have food, it is a very inviting atmosphere where people can bring their families, so you're not waiting in a line with your life, what you feel is your life, in documents in your hand, waiting to see a lawyer. And it has been extremely successful in partnership with Goodwill and Legal Aid of the Bluegrass to bring people in so they get not only their records expunged, but resources and potential jobs moving forward.
Barb, I know you've partnered with others in the community, including Goodwill. Could you talk a little bit about that, please?
Yes, we would be dead on the vine without our community partners. So we partner with Lexington Rescue Mission, Jubilee Jobs, Goodwill of Kentucky, Kentucky Department of Corrections, and they're kind of a feeder. They know our culture and what we're looking for in family members, and I mean employees. We say family members at the bakery, sorry. They know what we're looking for, and that's so critical. And then as it goes for expungement, when we talked earlier this week, I shared that we had a gentleman that joined us after being in prison for 24 years. He came out, was having intense difficulty finding a job, but because of the referral to us, he was able to come and we hired him. If he had had expungement available or he had taken advantage of that, it could have been life-changing for him. He could have gone a different route, but thankfully we scored him at the bakery because he has emerged as the father figure, the leader, takes care of all of our second chance hires.
That's a great story. And, when I was in private practice for 30 years before I came to LSC, and we talked a lot about bet the company cases, which we would do on occasion. And in legal aid, bet the company cases are pretty much every case. If you're keeping somebody in their home, helping them out with the domestic violence situation, ladies and gentlemen, as you know, those are bet the company cases, and expungements and record clearing are really bet the company cases. So thank you for that.
Just want to add one thing
Yeah,
really quick.
please do.
For the individuals that we work with that do have a record or history of substance use disorder, opioid use disorder, they are the first to disqualify themselves. And it's terrible to say, but if we could give them that hope. I used to work directly dealing with population that, is struggling, overcoming barriers to employment and, things of that nature. Sometimes I would say they're so far down in a hole that they can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. And sometimes I have to be the one to shine a flashlight and say, there's a light here, come to me and let's try to get you some help. So for individuals that are disqualifying themselves, especially whenever it comes to expungement, whenever it comes to career opportunities, it's so important that our businesses put themselves out there as a welcoming atmosphere, and as well as our partners that are doing expungements and things of that nature as that welcoming atmosphere as well.
That's a great segue. Barb, you talked about the initiation of the program, and you've talked about a little bit of its success. I'd like to do a deep dive as to how you created that. How did you create a culture that accepted new colleagues with different backgrounds, and what does it take to build a recovery-friendly workplace culture?
Well, I was fortunate that we have a very strong vision, mission, and values already at More Than a Bakery. Like I said, we say family member, we don't say employee. Open door policy. And before we launched this, we talked a lot about policies that might eliminate some of these candidates. They may have court dates, they may have drug screens they need to attend. So doing a deep dive into our policies and making sure that they will help and welcome these family members. We also do a vision, mission, values meeting with all our new hires. And at that time, typically they share their story, their background with other family members that weren't hired through Second Chance. And I see tears rolling down people's faces as they share what's happened in their lives and how they've kind of been reborn. And now are really giving back to the community because they're providing for their families. And it's just an amazing thing.
That's terrific. Ryan, Kentucky has made significant progress through both public-private partnerships that you've described, but also legislative reforms, while other priorities such as streamlining expungement remain works in progress. And I know I've talked to Vic about that in the last couple days about streamlining the expungement process both here in Kentucky and elsewhere. Where do you see this work heading over the next several years, and what advice would you offer business leaders in other states?
Yeah, on the business leader side, you have to get involved. 1980s vision of how business works and your workforce works. It didn't work then, but it sounded good. It doesn't work now. This asking people to leave your personal problems at the door, work your 8 to 12 hours, and then pick your personal problems up on the way home. That doesn't work. And I tell businesses all the time, of course, I'm very judicious as I'm talking to businesses, but I subtly tell them that, they're a part of the community in which they live and operate. And if the community in which they're in is struggling with, opioid issues, high incarceration rates, chances are that their workforce is struggling with the same. So, the old adage of it's nice to have it and not need it as to need it and not have it. Having those resources available to their workforce is huge. So, whenever it came along to providing resources to business leaders and, our partners out there, it was huge to do, criminal justice reform and also protect businesses along the way. So in 2020, we passed the Kentucky Transformational Employment Program, which provides civil liability protection for employers when they're hiring from the fair chance population. So God forbid they develop a fair chance hiring pipeline, and then one of those people from that fair chance population causes an accident, someone gets hurt. The employer cannot be pursued for civil liability, saying that, you knew that they were, from the fair chance population, you assumed that risk, and then I got hurt because of it. They cannot be pursued because of that. But also there's more work to be done whenever it comes to expungements. It's really expensive. It's hard for us to put on these expungement clinics, especially our Fair Chance Opportunity Fair, because we make as much as we can free. We give free food, free music, all of those things. It's really expensive to do those things. And if we could do something where, the charges that are able to be expunged currently would automatically roll off, that would be a godsend. And then just expanding some of the opportunities for individuals that are, that do have lesser crimes that could be expunged in the future. Is huge. I understand, I've heard from judges, I've heard from lawyers, I've heard from everyone on the spectrum. I understand some of the concerns, but there's more that can be done from especially our point of view, seeing individuals that are struggling, that we know would be successful if they were just given a chance, that are blocked from that chance because of their past.
What about recruiting directly from recovery facilities?
Oh, that's been huge, but there are steps that have to be taken along the way. In working with employers, there is very few in the state of Kentucky that's like a 30-day treatment program. We've learned our lesson in the treatment world. That doesn't necessarily work. That starts the abstinence program. A lot of people don't understand the difference between recovery and abstinence. And 30 days, they are just abstinent at that point. They are not in recovery. They're not working a program. So in these longer treatment facilities that develop this workforce development aspect as, towards the end of, 6 to 9 month program where they're getting job skills training, introducing them to those employers that are providing fair chances to individuals that are going through that program is huge and overwhelmingly successful. So I would like to see more partnerships, more employers come to us asking to partner with those recovery facilities that are developing those skills that are really needed out in the workforce.
Barb, what advice would you offer to other business leaders, both in Kentucky and other states, based on your experience?
I can't tell you how wonderful this has been for us as a bakery. And I think a lot of employers are intimidated or afraid to make that change. And it has been so transformative for us on so many levels, just getting to know these family members, our retention rate, leadership within our organization. And I just want to tell everyone how important this is. And please try it.
Last opportunity for both of you. If Kentucky wants to continue leading the country on workforce participation and second chance employment, what's the next big opportunity, Ryan?
Clone Barb about 20 times, put her on a bus and send her speaking to every region in Kentucky. No, I think a lot of it is not being afraid to learn. For us at the Chamber, we created curriculum for employers, and we thought that as we move forward with this curriculum, that it would apply kind of universally. We have had recently employers that have, we build relationships with employers, and employers have been like, stop trying to convince me, show me how. So I think moving forward, it is important to us to move beyond philosophy. There's a fair chance population of folks out there that are willing and able to work. We understand that. Show me the best methodology that I can do here and to put it into practice. And I think partnering with Barb she is a champion for this work. She is a superstar in this work, but finding business leaders that have done it, that have been successful, and us learning from them so we can teach more businesses to be successful is going to be so important in the future. That, like I said, the time for us of creating curriculum and expecting other people to follow, it is almost over and done with. We need to meet employers where they are, hear from them, and then institute change on that system level that's going to be able to support them through that.
So Barb, you get the last word. How do we clone you?
I told you, get me a bus, I'll drive across the United States. But I just, building an employee success program, once you have people join your organization and sharing that with other employers to show this can be done. And again, the transformation for your organization is amazing. So let's get the bus and go.
Yeah, please.
Please join me in thanking Ryan Bowman and Barbara Aker. Thank you both. And now I'd like to call to the podium Carrie Stambaugh, staff attorney with Legal Aid of the Bluegrass.
Good morning. I'm Carrie Stambaugh. I'm a staff attorney at Legal Aid of the Bluegrass, and I'm an Equal Justice Works Fellow in the Opioid Crisis Response Program, and I served as a Rural Summer Fellow as well through Equal Justice Works. Before I became an attorney, I spent 2 decades as a journalist working in Central Appalachia, a place where the opioid epidemic isn't just a headline, it's daily life. I published crime blotters. I sat through fiscal court meetings where jailers begged for medical support for folks who were withdrawing in their cells. I attended legislative hearings where advocates pleaded for help to create treatment beds that didn't exist in rural Kentucky. I wrote about soaring overdose rates that stole thousands of lives and left survivors highly stigmatized. And I covered the broader challenges facing rural communities: housing instability, generational poverty, and the constant struggle to build opportunities where resources are scarce. The communities I worked in became my community, and I wanted to do more and more meaningful work for the people who became my friends and neighbors. Over time, I realized something. Reporters point out problems, but attorneys solve them. I wanted to be a problem solver. Not just for those affected by addiction, but for anyone who needed an advocate. And while that motivation came from wanting to serve my community, the opioid crisis was woven into the lives of people I loved, and therefore it was woven into mine. My cousin and best friend from birth, Daniel, became addicted, prescribed opioid pills for a sports injury that led him down the path to heroin and then to fentanyl. My husband, Carl, served 23 years as a firefighter in his hometown of Ashland. During that time, he ran thousands of overdose calls. Often, he couldn't save classmates or neighbors. And he watched even the most dedicated firefighters struggle with compassion fatigue as the opioid crisis raged on. He retired the day before I took my bar exam. At the same time, legal aid attorneys across Kentucky were seeing the epidemic show up in civil courtrooms, in housing cases, in public benefits cases, cases involving veterans, and in domestic violence cases where abusers weaponized addiction to gain custody of children. So in 2021, Kentucky's 4 legal aids came together to launch Project Renew, a statewide collaborative effort to support families and communities impacted by addiction. Research from the Kentucky Access to Justice Commission showed that resolving these legal issues remove barriers to recovery and help people build the stability that they need. And we know our clients rarely have just one legal problem. They face many, and they're intertwined. Project Renew's idea is simple: combine holistic legal services and supportive community partnerships to strengthen the 4 evidence-based pillars of recovery: health, home, community, and purpose. In other words, help clients untangle their legal knots so they can build the lives they want, brick by brick. The year Project Renew launched, I started law school. I joined Legal Aid of the Bluegrass as a summer law clerk in my rural Moorhead office, and I worked through law school and convinced Legal Aid to hire me at graduation. A few weeks after passing the bar, I was named an EJW Fellow. Over the last 5 years, I've watched Project Renew grow, and I've seen firsthand why this work matters. People who have battled addiction are criminalized, dehumanized, and deeply stigmatized, even long into recovery. By the time they reach legal aid, many of them have lost hope that the legal system can help them. So Project Renew attorneys begin by breaking down barriers. We build trust. We become the go-to resources in recovery communities for legal help. We do this through outreach, going to recovery centers, hosting education events, meeting one-on-one with clients, attending reentry council meetings, joining community health coalitions, and completing hundreds of in-person intakes. Because the first barrier to accessing civil legal services is knowing that a problem is a legal problem. And the second is knowing who to call. Once a person in recovery connects with legal aid, we help them to identify which cracks in their foundation, in community, in health, in home, in purpose, need to be repaired and can be done so through legal services. To support community, we represent individuals in family law cases, helping clients end marriages that threaten their recovery often after decades of intimate partner violence. To support home, we represent individuals facing eviction and educate communities on fair housing and Kentucky landlord-tenant laws. To support health, we help individuals access public benefits and insurance coverage and educate courts and the private bar about what medicated assisted treatment is, a protected health treatment that should never be used as a reason to deny custody or timeshare. To support purpose, we partner with organizations like Goodwill to represent thousands of individuals in criminal record expungements. Expungements restore a person's ability to participate fully in their family and community, to work, to volunteer, to coach, to be paid for caregiving they already provide. And most importantly, it allows a person in recovery to match on paper the person they've become inside. And even when outcomes aren't what clients had hoped for, they often tell me they're satisfied because they were given a chance they would have never taken without a legal aid attorney standing by their side. And as overdose deaths begin to fall, thousands more people are reaching recovery, and they will have legal needs for decades. I know this personally because my cousin Daniel, Narcan saved him from a fatal overdose, and treatment transformed him. But 9 years into his recovery, he is still untangling the legal knots that his addiction created. And that's why this work must continue. Because when someone reaches recovery, the legal system should not be the next barrier they face. It should be the hand that helps to lift them up. And as attorneys, judges, and funders who shape and fund this work, you already know and understand the power of the law. Project Renew shows its humanity. It shows that when we use the law to remove barriers instead of reinforcing them, people can rebuild their lives, families can be reunited, and communities can heal. Sustaining this work means sustaining hope and ensuring every person in recovery has the chance and the support they deserve to build the life they want. Thank you.
Good morning, everyone. I'm Jennifer Perkins. I'm managing attorney of volunteer services and community engagement at the Legal Aid Society. I'm joined here today by Rachel Wheat Jackson. She's a former legal aid client, and Felix Sharp. He's a volunteer attorney who volunteers his time with legal aid. So in our first panel, we heard about Kentucky's leadership in second chance employment and some of the policy changes that have helped move this work forward. I personally have had the privilege of working in the area of expungement for the last decade. I started my work at Legal Aid Society as an expungement fellow, doing expungement work day in and day out every day. Back then, the law was very limited, and it was very difficult to expunge any offenses. You had to meet very strict criteria, very few people qualified, the rules were very complicated, and even when someone had done everything right, even when they had been in recovery for a decade or more, often those doors were closed. Expungement was not an option. Today, many more Kentuckians have the opportunity to clear their eligible records, but that's really just the beginning of the story. So the focus of this panel is going to be on the expungement experience and those doors that open after someone is able to expunge their record, and how our volunteers and community partners play a role in that. So I want to start with you, Rachel. You've lived this journey. And could you tell us a little bit about what this experience has been like for you personally, your expungement experience? We'd love to hear about it.
Okay, so my expungement fair was right in the middle of COVID. So it was 2021, it was virtual. I was so excited. I think I'd waited 10 years at that point after all of my journey, waiting the time after you're off supervision, because of course I was on probation for a period of time. And so the way that the process worked was it wasn't live like it is now, where you see the attorney that day and they have your background and they're able to tell you, you did this online forum and then you were like checked off a list and you were told to call in to intake. And so when I called in, unfortunately, we had an unruly dog and my neighbors had complained about my dog. And so I had to go to court for a civil complaint. Well, however that looks on the Kentucky court.gov, whatever, it looked like I had an open case. And so as sweet as she could on the other end of the phone said, well, I'm sorry, but you're going to have to wait another year because you have an active case. And I was like, an active case? So there was something said in the previous panel about, you know, the hope that the attorney gives and how he mentioned how we're oftentimes our own worst enemy because we give up on ourselves. And so there were a series of hurdles in that being just the first one. There was a box not checked after our first court appearance. But once I waited that year, once I got with my attorney who, took the best care of me in my case. And I often say that if I wouldn't have had to wait that year, I don't know if I would have gotten her. And so, you know, sometimes the stars align the way they are just supposed to, but we don't know that at the time. And so I got the perfect attorney that went to battle for me and gave me the hope that despite whatever we got, whatever, and maybe it's not a permanent no, it's just a not right now. And so that was a little bit of my experience with just the discouragement sometimes that even though you know you're eligible, is it really going to happen? Is it really going to be? Am I really going to be expunged?
And can you talk a little bit about what that looked like, the actual expungement, process, the court experience, all of that?
Absolutely. So we had waited the year. I circled back and I did the intake again, and then was told, yes, it's a go. Was contacted by a legal advocate, and then was told I would meet my attorney and we would go forward with the paperwork. And then I got like my first, I guess, hope shot in that. I was under the impression that because of some of my previous charges, I only had one expungible offense based on everything that I had read. And of course, you go down the rabbit holes and the lists of, what are. And so I thought, well, if I'm not, then I can seek a pardon. I can do what I need to do. But she explained to me that she could ask the current Commonwealth attorney to review my past case, see if we could amend anything down to expungible offenses. And she was determined to make sure that I was going to have a clean record. So we go to court, and a business partner of mine at the time sat beside me that day, and I was so excited, but it wasn't a judge that had ever seen me. It wasn't a prosecutor that I'd ever worked with. And so it was kind of like strangers. And again, just a little bit nerve-wracking, because I thought, it's not people that know, which I wanted that. I didn't want any preferential treatment because of maybe the committees I sit on now, or the house that I run, or the work that I do. And so because I wanted to be able to tell people that this works regardless who you are. But the judge, I got the impression that it was kind of like, oh, well, there was never a, what would this mean for you? There was never a, and unfortunately, a few weeks later, I got a packet in the mail, and I thought, well, it was just a formality, and it was going to be, my approval, and, I was going to open it up, and like fireworks were going to go off, and it was a denial that there was something not checked or not done. And I immediately screenshotted my attorney. I sent a frustrated text to my business partner, and he said, I don't know if those judges realize that with a 5-second flick of their pen, the impact that they have on our lives. We are both several degrees later, several years off of probation, several hard work behind us to, you said it earlier, to kind of get free from that, not let us hold it back. And so to have that denial first off was
so procedural like that, right?
Yeah.
Just to check in or not check in a box.
That's it.
Mm-hmm. Could you tell us a little bit about what motivated you to expunge your record in the first place? What led you to seek the expungement?
So I think I've been really lucky. I feel like I've been really lucky. When I was in treatment 15 years ago, I came from a background in banquet and event planning, hotel restaurant management, that type of thing. And I knew that wasn't going to be an environment that was going to be conducive to a recovering lifestyle. And so I, as most of us do, jumped feet first into human services. And so I have been able, from that point going forward, to utilize what may be liabilities as assets in job interviews and in that particular career path, because I had the lived experience to excel in helping my clients and the community. And so it hadn't held me back in that sense. Now, it created extra work for every, school application, for every sometimes job application, scholarship, grant, licenses. I always had to appeal to a board or write a paper or do some extra work to get to explain where I was and why who this is on this paper isn't me anymore. But with my older two children, they were in private school, and it was as simple as meeting with the board of directors for that school to allow me to be involved in their field trips and as the class mom, and do the things that I want to do because I want to be an involved mom now. But when they transitioned to public school, and now I have 2 younger children, I knew that without a record expungement, I wouldn't be able to be present in their lives in that way.
Because of that background screening.
Because of the
that's
background
needed
screening, I
for
couldn't volunteer on the
everything.
t-ball field. I couldn't, go to Kentucky Down Under or
Class parties.
That's it.
All the things.
And then
yeah.
how would I explain that to them? And so that was one of the biggest motivations. Now you don't realize that when that you're just kind of seeing that you don't see the forest for the trees. But of course, then when I applied for my CSW and I screenshotted the computer screen and sent it to my attorney and said, do I really get to say no? Like, do I, when it said
With regard to having a criminal
do you have a criminal
record?
record? And I felt like I was holding my breath, like I was going to say no, and then somebody was going to be like, that's not true,
Yep. And Kentucky law, specifically says you're not required to
Yeah.
disclose it any longer on
Yeah.
applications, for
The
employment.
first time
for
I
otherwise.
got you get a copy when somebody requests your background, and the first time I got it back, and I said, well, and it really just looks like I don't know how to stop at stop signs. Like, what do you know? So
Love it. Rachel, your story is really powerful, and thank you so much for sharing with us. I think that's something people don't think about a lot, like volunteering at your kid's school, being your kid's basketball coach, all these ways that you want to, be involved in your child's life, and you would be barred from doing that just because of your past. And so I think that's really important to share that aspect of it too, in addition to the employment and education and everything else. It's a huge barrier for people, and to be able to leave that in the past and move forward in your life, I know is meaningful. So thank you for sharing that with us. Felix, I want to turn to you now. I know you've sat with people at expungement clinics many times. You've heard stories like Rachel. Does this sound familiar to you as you're hearing her story? And I wanted to know if there were stories that you think of from your experiences volunteering, anything that comes to mind, some of these sort of, same sort of experiences our clients have.
Well, Rachel, thank you for your story. And in some respects, it's familiar. In some respects, not, because we're often there right at the beginning step. But we don't get to see when you actually get to go volunteer with the kids' school and have that participation that you want to. But to answer your other question, Jen, yeah, it's oftentimes where people just want to be contributing members of society, and it's something from 15 years ago that has no bearing on who they are today that you're helping out with. So it's really humbling to hear the impact of some of this work that legal aid does, because like I said before, we're often there in the beginning. So I'm just smiling from ear to ear because we don't get to hear some of those stories sometimes.
You hear those desires and the things people are hoping to do, but then to hear it kind of full circle like that is powerful. And Felix, I want to reflect for a moment on the process, on this, years-long process. It's lengthy, like Rachel described, so it takes forever. I'm being told you got to wait another year. It's so hard. As an attorney, I'm sure that this, doesn't surprise you. Our legal system's complicated. It can be daunting for someone who's not used to navigating it. And that's where you come in as a volunteer attorney, right? So I'd love to hear a little bit about your journey as a volunteer attorney, what got you into this, and what's made you continue volunteering your time with Legal Aid Society.
Well, my journey started when I was a first-year associate at my law firm. Now, Judge Josephine Buckner, I think she was working at Legal Aid at the time, and stopped by our office and offered to do a training. And I said, yeah, I want to go. And ever since that training, Brenda Bacon is the paralegal who sends out files on Fridays, and you have cases on today, Monday, in 700 West Jefferson. But if I had a Monday morning open, I would get the file on Friday and show up on Monday. But I started doing it because I had volunteered, but then I kept doing it because it makes you a better lawyer. You know, it makes you a better lawyer getting those opportunities to stand up and represent your client and stand between your client in the court. And these were domestic violence order cases, but to stand between your client in the court, to stand between your client and an alleged abuser. I mean, you know, it really sharpens your resolve and your sword, so to speak. So that's why I continued to do it, because and then obviously, so those are, you know, the selfish reasons, but altruistically, you know, you would get that hug, that pat on the back from either your client or their father or child who came with them to court that day, and you kind of, you know, held their hand through the process. So it's, I mean, to be honest with you, it's rewarding all around. And since then, since I've gone in-house, participating in expungement clinics and hearing at least similar stories to Rachel's, and being able to have an impact there also.
Thank you so much for sharing that, Felix, and we appreciate you so much and the time you donate to help our clients. It is impactful. You know, the difference between going through this experience on your own versus having an attorney there to guide you through the court processes, to explain, you know, what it means. It's huge. It makes all the difference. Rachel, you shared earlier about, you know, that experience standing in front of the judge, being told you had to wait another year after having already waited so long to expunge your record. What would you want people who work in the legal system to understand about moments like that?
I think that it's confusing for us. I had navigated a lot of my own legal stuff at one point, just to avoid high private attorney fees.
Sure.
And I got really fortunate with the connections I made with some of our court clerks. And they would help me as much as they, maybe by pointing or as much as they could. But when it does get hairy, you know, and it's legal jargon that we may not understand, that I think about a lot of times now as a therapist, you know, if I'm walking through sensitive seasons with clients, and oftentimes their frustration would seem to be directed at me, and, you know, and it's not at all. And I'm certain, golly, I said, you make me want to go be an attorney, like to hear you and your work. Like, I can't imagine those moments where you all are holding your breath, you know, of like, oh gosh, how are they going to react maybe to this? What if she didn't get the DVO or the EPO, or what if, you know, all of the things. And so, yeah, just that our frustration in those points, or, you know, just reciprocal damage. And a lot of times it's because we carry guilt and shame, you know, and there's that part too.
Thank you for sharing that, Rachel. And Felix, hearing Rachel describe her experience, what strikes you as someone who stood beside clients in the courtroom, you know, about that impact of your role as the attorney?
I think that when you're practicing law, when you're a young associate, you can somewhat be self-centered. I've got these billable hour requirements that I've got to meet. I've got deadlines. I got to respond to these partners. But stories like Rachel's really put things into perspective. You know, I also think that you can feel like you don't have like you don't know anything, or you don't have the power to help somebody. But stories like Rachel's tell you that you do, even just being that shield between the court system and your client, you know, just having that I'm going to stand up and say my name and take the questions and all of that, and be the go-between. Understanding that actually has an impact is again, I think, just humbling to hear. Yeah.
Listening to your stories, part of what's striking to me is that it's no one person, it's no one organization that makes these stories possible, right? It's a collaboration, it's a partnership. For you, Rachel, there was Goodwill, right, with the expungement clinic. There was legal aid, and the services that they provided you. There's your kids' school and your desire to be involved there in your community. And then for you, Felix, there's, Judge Buckner and the training, that when she was formed, at the time, a legal aid attorney, going out in the community, sharing the word, sharing the work we're doing. There's your employer now who promotes the pro bono service that you're able to do, your volunteer work. And then there's you and other volunteer attorneys volunteering your time. And so it really takes, all of these partners working together, right, to move forward. So what I'd like to hear from each of you all about why those partnerships matter and like what happens, when we aren't working in collaboration like that. And I'd start with you, Rachel. How do you think this, collaboration in your community has played a role in moving forward?
Well, it's been said a couple of times this morning, that it truly does take a village, and it does. I think I wasn't aware of the preparation and the time and fiscal efforts that it takes to put on the expungement fairs and those types of things. And so you think if there weren't those pieces and everybody wasn't willing, if you all weren't willing to meet here today and, participate in multidisciplinary conversations to understand how this truly affects people. My son's with me today. And so when you think about the trickle effect of like, this didn't just affect me in a positive manner, it affects 4 other kids. It affects my parents positively. If it affects my whole community, I'm able to help other women go through the same thing and get through it. And then it continues. And then we in turn build stronger community partners because then we're able to then link with people and provide those services and help. And so, you're only as strong as your weakest link sometimes. And so if everybody is not as excited about the effort and willing to take your all's time as professionals, then man, there'd be a whole lot of people out here that aren't able to pursue things that, you said you deserve to be able to do that and to pursue. And so.
Felix, do you have any thoughts on the role of these partnerships, the community collaborations?
Yeah, I mean, I think that what's the quote? If you want to go fast, go alone. If you want to go far, go together. And I'm lucky to have had employers that really see the value and in providing time to do this work, and they benefit also. They benefit also because our skills are being sharpened in the process. So it's again, I guess the theme of my position here is that it's mutually beneficial. It's mutually beneficial to volunteer in this capacity.
We've covered a lot. We've talked about the doors that open in the wake of record clearing. We talked about the work and partnerships that are necessary to open those doors. Before we wrap up, I wanted to give each of you an opportunity to just share some final thoughts. If someone leaves this room today remembering one thing about second chances and with regard to expungement, what do you hope it is? Felix, I'll start with you this time.
I mean, I could just see myself being on a field trip with Rachel, and we probably wouldn't be dressed like we are today. We just have on jeans and a t-shirt. And I think that from just hearing your story, Rachel, we're just helping people again, just trying to do things that we take for granted, and just recognizing and taking the time to recognize that.
I told you earlier that, yes, Sunday, I was taking off my volunteer tag because I get to teach Sunday school now. And the particular church that we go to for the safety of our kids does a background check. And I had that thought of fixing to throw that tag in the trash. And I thought, man, what an opportunity that I get to have my kids help me, to positively impact kids in that classroom, to have fun. And if I hadn't had the opportunity to have expungement, then I wouldn't have that sticker.
Rachel, I love that. Thank you so much for sharing your story. Thank you both. We appreciate your time. Thank you.
Thank you, Jen, Felix, and Rachel, for such a meaningful and inspiring discussion. And Rachel, special thank you to you for your bravery for coming forward and sharing your story with all of us. So let's just give them one more round of applause. So I'm Angela Dorsey. I'm the Executive Director of the Appalachian Research and Defense Fund of Kentucky, also known as Apple Red Legal Aid. And before we close for the afternoon, we have one more story to share with you about the impact of second chances. The next video tells the story of Candy Price, an Apple Red client. I'm very proud to highlight the work of our team to serve people like Candy across Appalachia, Kentucky. So after Candy's story, LSC President Ron Flagg will close us out. So.
I came to Apple Red in seeking expungement of my records, which contained felonies and misdemeanors. I knew that it was a process. I was like, yes, I do need a lawyer. I didn't start getting in trouble until I was 40 years old. I don't, just life caught up with me. Being a single parent, my son, his father OD'd and died before he was 3 years old. This is where your life can get turned around by just one bad decision, really, and snowball. I was not happy. I was sick, literally, physically, emotionally, mentally, every way. I was sick, and I had a son. I had my family. I loved them. I was just like, my son already lost a father. Candy, you got to get your life together. That I ain't going nowhere here fast. Because I had all those charges, I felt defeated, and I felt like I'm going to have to just take whatever job I can get. I knew I had to get out of the situation that I was in with a toxic partner. He didn't want to get out of doing drugs or doing things that weren't healthy. I just had to step out and get that little gas station job, which really saved my life in a way, you know what I'm saying? It's a very good stepping stone to get me out and be independent, get the charges off, and get a better life. Went to the courthouse in Johnson County and McGoffin County. I ended up with some paperwork from the courthouse. It was just elaborate. It was just a process. It was definitely, I knew that I could have some help, and it did help me. Each time we went to court, and I just felt lift off of me, just the burden, the struggles. I was door dashing currently, just being myself, friendly self, because I'm being more free as I'm getting these charges off of me, as I'm doing the right thing. And ran into a girl. It was just, she was like, I bet you would like to apply for this local sewing factory in West Liberty. I bet you'd love it, she said. And I was like, well, I'll try it, because I didn't have the courage before, because I had all that against me and it was weighing me down. But I got interviewed, and then I got offered a job there, and it's really good. I hope to maybe retire in about 10 years and just take care of grandkids and just live my best life the rest of my life, After this expungement behind me, a good job, whether it be this one or something else, I can go to school now and substitute teach. I have a lot more opportunity, and I'm so happy about it. I could be more excited. I'm not what I went through. I'm God's child, and I'm here for purpose and to just share my testimony and give hope and the grace that He has given me, and to look forward to a future and a hope if it wasn't for that.
Again, thank you all for being here. I hope we see you at the reception this afternoon. And I want to leave you with a couple thoughts. I'm so grateful that Candy was brave enough to share her story. And as you all know, there are thousands of Candys, both here in Kentucky and across the country. And sadly, for every Candy that gets the services she needed to advance her life, there's another Candy who is not able to be served for lack of resources. That's why it's so important that we increase funding and support for legal aid, both here in Kentucky and across the country. And we're working every day to do that. And with your help, we will. And by being here today, you've taken the first step. And of course, most of you, many of you in your day jobs do that as well. So again, thank you for being here. We look forward to seeing you this afternoon at our award ceremony, and have a good day.